Hi everyone, I'm Marcus Voss from AXO, and today I'm going to tell you how we choose the best agile method to manage the project based on the influencing factors on our project. We remember. In the video on the influencing factors, I explained how the concrete project procedure can be systematically defined on this basis. The selection of the appropriate agile project management method is an essential part of this. In simple terms, selecting the appropriate agile PM method works on the basis of the influencing factors using 5+1 core questions. Question 1 is whether the PM method is actually already specified in whole or at least in part. With regard to the influencing factors, the question is therefore whether there is an external constraint for this. One example is the public sector in Germany, where the use of V-Model XT is set in all software projects. Other organizations may have set Scrum or SAFe as a corporate standard. If this is the case, that is, there are already specifications, an initial selection is no longer necessary, but we can still answer the further questions. This can be useful for checking whether the given method is also optimal under objective criteria. In addition, this can also be useful to support a possibly still necessary tailoring of the specification and/or to combine or supplement the specified method with a suitable complementary method such as Kanban or Scrum. In fact, this is done with the V-Model XT in most cases today. A combination with Kanban as a form of tailoring is absolutely not unusual. But if this is not the case, that is if no method has been specified yet, then of course we continue with the goal of the initial selection. The second question is whether lean production is possible. To understand this question, here is a short excursion into the topic of lean. Lean production or lean manufacturing is a production principle. It has its origins at Toyota in the 1950s. Lean production has been internationally known since the early 1990s, in particular through publications by James P. Womack, Daniel T. Jones, and Daniel Roos. The core idea of lean production is the optimization of production through value and value stream orientation, through the avoidance of waste, through the implementation of the flow and pull principle, as well as through continuous improvement and the pursuit of perfection. There are many very good descriptions of the principle on the internet, so we will not go into more detail here. Kanban is now a special method for the management of a lean production, which also comes from the time mentioned above. Kanban knows 6 core practices, arranged below right clockwise as follows: the visualization of the workflow, the limitation of the tasks in progress or the work in progress, the targeted control of the flow, making the rules or policies explicit, the implementation of feedback loops, and the collaborative improvement. Particularly characteristic for Kanban is that the control of the flow and the implementation of the pull principle take place on the basis of Kanban cards, which represent units of work and are passed on explicitly according to the pull principle, and a visualization of the workflow with the help of so-called Kanban boards. Lean software development is the application of the lean production principle to software development. This idea was first explicitly written down in the book by Mary and Tom Poppendieck from 2003, that is, both lean and agile in software development date back to about the same time. And what is the relationship between lean and agile? Or rather, what is the difference between the two process principles in the area of modern software development? Well, at the beginning of the 2000s, lean and agile were indeed still two relatively separate schools of thought. Today, the perspectives have largely converged. Today, modern agile software development is always lean at its core, or, if you will, agile is a subset of lean or a lean plus X. And so back to question 2 in the context of our selection process for the PM method, namely whether lean production is possible. This question is now decided primarily on the basis of the influencing factor of the customer culture, or the culture given in the organization purchasing the service. If there are problems in the organization to implement the described lean principles and core practices, then lean production is not effectively feasible. And since, as described, modern agile software development must at least first be lean at its core, in this case we are simply out of scope with the determination of a suitable agile PM method. In the other case, that is, if lean production is possible in principle, the third question is whether a more strictly organized and clocked agile production makes sense. Here too the core question is whether the organization is ready for this. Introducing lean production principles is relatively lightweight, but organized and clocked agile production demands significantly more commitment from the organization. for example, in the form of strictly clocked iterations and a compulsion to continuously prioritize features at the beginning of each iteration and continuous feedback on the work results at the end. So this capability of the organization is necessary. However, this is not sufficient for a decision in this direction. The other question is whether a stricter organization and timing is also necessary or whether it makes sense. I'll come back to that in a moment. So if the answer to the question of whether organized and clocked agile production makes sense is no, then Kanban in particular is first recommended as a method for managing a lightweight lean process. Lean production in general and Kanban in particular have in some way anchored as a principle to pick up the customer or the organization where it stands. Team size limits and team roles are not fixed by Kanban. Work is not strictly organized in fixed iterations, but rather seen as a continuous workflow. Keyword value stream orientation and strict rules and rituals are not prescribed either. Depending on where the organization stands, Kanban can often also be used in combination with other PM techniques, such as a distinctive risk management or similar. If, on the other hand, the answer to question 3 is yes, that is, if the organization is basically mature enough for organized and synchronized agile production, and if this also makes sense, then the fourth question is whether scaling is necessary. Here, therefore, it is a question of further influencing factors, namely the size of the scope to be implemented and indirectly derived from this, the size of the required project team. No special scaled approach is needed when it comes to a single team with the ideal size of 7 ± 2 people. But even beyond that, with a total team size of up to approximately 15 people, who are then perhaps structured into sub-teams, no special additional mechanisms are needed at the overall team level. In that case, however, the fifth and final question then arises, namely whether one wants to rely on complete self-organization in the team with a view to efficiency and effectiveness, or whether a little more organization and defined role play would be useful. Keyword agility profile. This is where the culture and skills of the project team itself come into play as the final influencing factors. Where does the team stand and how experienced is it, especially with important issues for successfully managing the project and defining a sustainable architecture for the solution? If the answer is yes, that is, if we trust the team to be efficient and effective with 100% self-organization, then and only then is pure Scrum a legitimate choice, in the sense that, in addition to the Scrum Master and the product owner, both of whom stand to some extent alongside the team, the third role is only defined as being part of the team. Within the team, there are therefore in the pure form, first of all, no further attributions of roles, of team internal roles. These are found by themselves. With this, we have already sorted the two most widespread methods, Kanban and Scrum, into our question scheme. As already mentioned, Kanban is somewhat lighter. That is, it is not based on a strictly iteration-based approach, but rather views the process as a flow of continuous value creation. Furthermore, Kanban does not define fixed rituals like Scrum. Scrum, on the other hand, is much more formal and demands more from the entire organization. Scrum requires a strict timing of the iterations and demands the known rituals such as sprint planning, daily, review, or retro. However, perhaps the optimal procedure is also an intermediate variant. If the answer to question 3 about the meaningfulness of organized and clocked agile production is not a clear yes or no, but rather somewhere in between, a defined method in this intermediate area is, for example, Scrumban. Scrumban goes back to Corey Larders and his book from 2009 and in short works more like Kanban in terms of clocking, but adopts, at least as it is usually lived, the rituals of Scrum. The original approach in the definition of Scrumban was that of an optimization of Scrum, derived from experience through the omission of strict timing, and organization often perceived as rather obstructive. In this sense, a Scrum minus X, but also an addition of the above-mentioned lean or Kanban principles, especially in the form of boards with explicit work in process limits, and with several columns supporting the flow and the pull principle. However, the scenario where the answer to question 5 about the meaningfulness of complete self-organization is not yes, but no, is also exciting. Mind you, this does not usually mean that there are incompetent or unmotivated members in the team, and that they therefore need a strict organization with experts who tell them where to go. But for certain tasks, from the perspective of effective and especially efficient development, it is simply necessary to have a certain amount of experience. Experience is important because without experience there is a risk of running in the wrong direction, making unnecessary or even harmful mistakes or experiments, and thus wasting time and resources unnecessarily. In our project experience, this is especially true for the task of managing the project and for that of defining a sustainable architecture. We go into this in more detail in the video on internal team roles. In any case, in this scenario, often no pure Scrum is chosen but a Scrum plus X. That is Scrum with a few organizational additions. Less well-known methods such as disciplined agile delivery, among others, also go in this direction. Let's now take a closer look at the individual aspects of the spectrum of non-scaled methods discussed so far. I won't go through the table cell by cell now. Everyone can look at that separately. I just want to show, and this is in the column on the far right, what often works very well and what also shows a certain trend that we have seen in practice in recent years. After that, the trend is to be a bit more flexible with regard to the strict clocking as it is provided for in pure Scrum. In addition, flow control via boards with work in process limits and more state columns is becoming increasingly prevalent. And finally, team internally defined roles are also found more frequently in order to optimally integrate people with the corresponding experience, most frequently in the form of team leads for the management topics on the one hand, and architecture leads for ensuring a sustainable architecture on the other. And so, back to the selection process, it is to be added here first of all still that independently of whether pure Scrum or a variant with somewhat more organization is used, individual Kanban elements are often combined, in particular Kanban cards and the Kanban board. Many believe today that the board and the cards placed on it in the sense of user stories belong firmly to Scrum as a method. This is not true, but of course it does not mean that this widespread technique is bad. But now back to question 4 about scaling. What if the team is now larger and thus scaling is necessary? In this case, the bonus question is how much? In the case where only some scaling is needed, that is, we are talking about 3 or 4 teams and maybe 15 up to 40 people, there are 2 approaches: Nexus and Less, both of which are based on Scrum and only give a few additional specifications for organizing sub-teams. In case that is not enough, so if we are talking about 5 or more teams or 40 or more people, at some point a lightweight organization of scaling is not enough. The best known representative of a PM methodology for this area is SAFe, the Scaled Agile framework, which provides the idea of lean and agile in detail over several levels up to the entire organization, with a large amount of additional organizational definitions and mechanisms. Here, as with Nexus or Less, the lowest level of individual agile teams usually work according to Scrum and/or Kanban. For more details on the scaled methods mentioned, many informative videos can be found on the internet. So much for this, admittedly somewhat striking and simplified, process for determining the appropriate agile PM method for our project. Finally, I would just like to point out that we may have to think about these issues more than just once at the beginning of the project. In long-running projects or long-running product development, these questions may indeed arise from time to time, for example, when the culture of the organization or the teams has evolved or when the project has grown. In that case, the approach can and must evolve as well for optimal effectiveness and efficiency. And in the next video, we'll take a look at the methods for understanding the content of a project in a structured way. Until then,